They cannot name what has changed. You recognize this. The room is the same, the routines are the same, but something they relied upon has been withdrawn. And the withdrawal was not announced. It happened the way a door closes in a house that has stood open for years, not with force, not with drama, with the quiet finality of a hinge settling into a position it has always been capable of reaching. This is what I want to speak to you about today. Not what you did, not the difficulty of leaving, not the courage it required, because I do not believe it was courage in the way that word is usually meant. It was exhaustion reaching its terminus. It was the moment the psychic labor required to stay exceeded what any organism, human or otherwise, can indefinitely sustain. What looked like a decision was, in fact, a completion, and what I want to examine is what that completion exposed in the one who is still standing in the room you left. There is a particular psychological event that occurs when a person who has served as a primary carrier of another's unconscious projection finally withdraws that service. It does not look spectacular from the outside. There is no collapse visible to the casual observer, not at first. What occurs instead is something I have watched unfold again and again. In my consulting room, in letters brought to me by the exhausted and the leaving a kind of internal implosion, slow and without sound. In the psyche of the one who required you to remain small, manageable, and uncertain. To understand this, we must first name what the dynamic actually was. You were not, in any meaningful psychological sense, simply a partner, a friend, a child, a colleague. You were a mirror, a specific kind of mirror, one positioned carefully, maintained painstakingly, polished by your own compliance, in which the one who required your presence could look and see something they could not tolerate seeing in themselves. What they needed from you was not your company. What they needed was your collapse, your doubt, your willingness to remain perpetually less than what you actually are. Because as long as you remain diminished, their own unmet interior could remain unexamined. This is the shadow dynamic at its most precise. I have written in my work on the structure of the psyche, of the process by which the unconscious displaces its own unacknowledged contents onto those nearest to it. The one who cannot face their own inadequacy will find, with remarkable reliability, a person willing to carry that inadequacy for them. The one who cannot bear their own need will locate a person who has been trained from early in life to absorb need without complaint. This is not conspiracy. It is not even strategy. In the conscious sense, it is the unconscious moving in the direction of least psychological resistance, and empaths, those trained early to perceive emotional temperature, to modulate themselves according to it, to soothe what was volatile and calm what was erupting, are, in psychological terms, the path of least resistance. The mirror that you were did not reflect them as they were. It reflected them as tolerable, and that is a different thing entirely. When you left, when the mirror withdrew, what remained in the room was not simply an absence. What remained was the reflection the mirror had been preventing. All the unprocessed shadow material, the unacknowledged emptiness, the grandiosity built over a wound that was never named, all of it remained. remained, and had nowhere to go. This is the moment I want you to understand precisely, because there is a widespread belief, and I have encountered it in those who come to me after the leaving, that what the one who controlled you feels upon your departure is grief, that they miss you, that somewhere beneath the surface of what may look like rage or indifference or frantic replacement, there is a genuine love that your absence has now uncovered. I do not want to be careless with this. There may be something they feel that resembles grief. The psyche is rarely simple, and I would not claim it can produce only one response at a time. But what I observed, what I watched over years of sitting with those who had been left, as well as those doing the leaving, is that the dominant experience inside the one who required your presence is not grief for you. It is terror, and the object of that terror is not your departure. The object of that terror is what your departure has left visible. Think of it this way: a person who has organized their entire interior life around the regulation of what they cannot face will construct over years a precise system of avoidance. That system requires material. It requires a continuous supply of external sources of self-definition, admiration, control, compliance from those around them, evidence of their own specialness, superiority, or victimhood. The empath in the system is not one piece of that supply. The empath very often is the central pillar, because the empath does not simply comply. The empath perceives, the empath reads the emotional room with accuracy that can feel to the one who requires control, like being truly seen. And to be truly seen, even when the seeing is distorted by the labor of absorption, for someone organized around emptiness, the closest approximation of intimacy they have been able to produce. When you left, you did not simply remove your compliance, you removed the illusion of being seen, and the wall behind you, the wall that was always there, the hollow wall built over an original wound that has never been entered and examined, became, for perhaps the first time, audible. A hollow wall has a sound. When you press your ear to it, when the room goes quiet enough, you can hear the emptiness behind it. That is what your leaving produced, not silence that feels like freedom, silence that sounds like the echo of an interior that was never developed. The glass is still there, but no one is standing in front of it. And what it reflects now is a room that has been arranged around an absence it cannot name. I once treated a man who came to me not in the weeks immediately following a departure, but months later, after what he described as a period of functioning normally. He had not, he said, fallen apart. He had managed, he had continued, he had, in his own words, moved forward. What brought him to my consulting room was not grief. It was a specific and recurring sensation he could not explain. The feeling, mid-conversation with anyone, a colleague, a new companion, a stranger at a dinner, that the person across from him had stopped being real, not that they had changed, that they had become, suddenly, and without warning, flat, two-dimensional, a surface without depth. He would look at someone who was speaking to him and find that he could not locate anything in their face that he needed. He described it as trying to drink from a glass that had no water in it. The glass was present, he could hold it, it simply did not contain what he required. I want to stay with this image for a moment, because what this man was describing was not a social difficulty. It was not anxiety or introversion or the ordinary exhaustion of human contact. What he was describing was the experience of a psyche that had lost its primary projective surface and had not yet understood that the problem was not the people in front of him. The problem was that the projection itself had nowhere to land. This is what happens in the interior of the one who required you. After you leave, the projection does not dissolve simply because you are no longer present to receive it. The shadow contents that were being maintained at a careful distance, the inadequacy, the dependency, the rage at one's own need, the terror of one's own emptiness do not retire because the mirror has been removed. They remain, and they press, and the one who has organized their psyche around never having to face them will, in the first weeks and months after your departure, begin moving through the people around them with increasing desperation, searching for a new surface that will hold the projection with the same precision that you did. This is what I have called, in my own thinking on these matters, the projective collapse interval. It is the period during which the projection has lost its object but has not yet found a new one. And during this interval, something becomes briefly, uncomfortably visible to the one experiencing it, the contents themselves, not clearly, not with the kind of clarity that would permit genuine psychological work, but enough to be felt, enough to produce the sensation my patient described, the flatness, the inadequacy of everyone around him, the sense that no one was quite enough to fill what he was feeling. He did not name what he was feeling as emptiness, he named it disappointment. And this is the characteristic distortion of the interval. What is interior is experienced as exterior. What is his own hollow becomes a deficiency he locates in every room he enters. You were not adequate in one way. Now, no one is adequate in any way. The wound, briefly undisguised, is immediately redisguised as a verdict on the world. I want you to understand this precisely, because there is a way in which this knowledge can be misused. It is tempting, and I have watched people do this, and I understand the temptation to read this account of the one who required you and arrive at something that feels like compassion, to say they are suffering, they are, beneath all of it, wounded, they are in pain, and from that reading, to soften what you have decided, to wonder if the leaving was perhaps too severe, to consider returning not because the original conditions have changed, but because the image of their interior collapse has activated once more the old trained reflex, the reflex that says suffering nearby is your responsibility to absorb. I am telling you plainly that reflex is not compassion. It is the mechanism itself, still running. After the machine has been switched off, genuine compassion does not require your re-entry into a system that required your diminishment in order to function. You can understand the wound without returning to be consumed by it. These are not the same action. Understanding is interior. Return is structural, and structurally, the system that required you to remain small has not changed because the person at its center is now experiencing the discomfort of having lost its primary component. The discomfort is real. It is not evidence of transformation. A system in withdrawal is not the same thing as a system under revision. I once treated a woman who dreamed for nearly a year of a house she had never lived in. In the dream, she would arrive at this house always at dusk, always through a side entrance she did not recognize, and find herself inside a long hallway. Its walls, a particular shade of pale gray, she could feel more than see. The floors were wood. Her footsteps made no sound. At the end of the hallway there was a door, half open, and through it came a light that was not warm, not cold, simply present. She would walk toward it. Every time she would reach the door and push it, and find that it did not open further, that the half open was the total of what was available. Through the gap she could see a mirror on the far wall of a room she could not enter, and in the mirror she could see her own reflection, but standing behind her. In the reflected room was a figure whose face she could never resolve, not threatening, simply unresolvable. A presence behind the glass that would not clarify no matter how long she looked. She told me she would wake from this dream with her hands pressed flat against the mattress, as if she needed to verify the surface beneath her. This woman had spent 11 years in a relationship with someone I would describe as organized entirely around the avoidance of their own interior. The dream was not about her fear. The dream was about what she had agreed to hold. The figure behind the reflection, unresolvable, persistent, present, without presence, was not her shadow. It was the shadow she had been carrying on behalf of someone else. The half-open door was the permanent condition of access in that relationship, partial, conditional, never fully available, and the mirror facing her showed her own face clearly, which was the first clarity in the dream that the dreaming psyche had begun to restore. Because here is what I want you to understand about the one who required you. They did not see you. This sounds simple, but I mean it in a precise psychological sense, not an emotional one. What they saw when they looked at you was not you. It was a reflection of the contents they had placed there. Your sensitivity was not perceived as a quality you possessed. It was experienced as a service they were receiving. Your depth was not recognized as something that originated in you. It was treated as a resource available for extraction. Your capacity to feel, to absorb, to translate, to endure, these were not seen as the interior life of another person. They were experienced as the natural properties of a surface that happened conveniently to be present, and when you withdrew, what they lost was not you. What they lost was the surface. This is why the grief, if we are to call it, that is structurally different from ordinary grief. In ordinary grief, we mourn a person, their particular voice, their particular presence, the specific texture of knowing them. What the one who required you mourns is the loss of a function, the loss of the organizing principle of their external world, the loss of the one who made the projection stable, the one who kept the hollow wall from resonating. The hallway is still there. The echo in it is louder now, and what that echo contains, the unmet wound, the unacknowledged emptiness, the rage at one's own dependency that has never been faced directly, all of it is now bouncing off surfaces that are not equipped to absorb it the way you were. This is not a small thing. I do not say it to diminish what you lived through. I say it to name precisely what you were providing. For years, inside a structure you may not have had words for. You were not simply in a difficult relationship. You were functioning as the primary psychological buffer between another person's unconscious and the reality of their own interior. That is a labor with a specific weight. It produces a specific kind of exhaustion, not the exhaustion of overwork, but the exhaustion of continuous, invisible translation, of standing between a wound and its owner, absorbing the pressure of the gap year after year until the body and the psyche simply stopped. That stopping was not failure, it was structural integrity. And now I want to speak about what happens next. Not for you, for them, because there is a sequence to what unfolds inside the one who has lost their primary projective surface, and it does not move in the direction most people expect.